awakening and trauma. Two words you don't often hear together. Often you hear awakening being spoken about, like waking up in a spiritual sense, waking up from delusion. And then there's a lot of information about trauma and trauma in the body, trauma in the being, and how to work through trauma. But there is a relationship between the two. Now, I'm not saying that everybody who's on an awakening path has a body or being that has been traumatized. That's definitely not the case. However, if you are on the path of awakening and you've experienced trauma or traumatic events in your life, at some point you will come into contact with very difficult, traumatic emotions that have been conditioned through a lifetime of self-defense, a lifetime of avoidance, a lifetime of energetic contraction. So when we talk about awakening, certainly when I talk about awakening, what I'm meaning, and I think what most people mean, is waking up from the delusion of a separate self into, well, truth. Whatever truth is, this is where it gets difficult to talk about, but we can definitely say, well, what we're waking up from is this delusive way of seeing the world through thought. And that delusion is that I am a separate entity from everything else, and I live in my mind, let's say, as a character moving through time. So we're looking to, well, certainly when we're looking at awakening, we're looking to see through that delusion. The delusion that I'm separate, I'm a character, and everyone else is separate from me. Now, the thing is, when we have awakening experiences and we start seeing through that delusion, the mechanism, the thinking mechanism, the mechanism of mind that creates a self, often in the case of people who've maybe suffered from trauma in the past or had adverse traumatic childhoods, that self mechanism was actually a really strong defense mechanism and a safety mechanism which mitigated feelings through the lens of thought. So when we were in life and we were growing and we were maybe experiencing at a young age traumatic events, that could be abuse, it could be emotional abuse, abandonment, anything really that has a real deep traumatic influence on us, and there was no sense of safety available at that time, the defense mechanism that would wrap around it would be the self, would be a character who would withdraw from life into a realm of thought and then try to manage the world and manage others so that things felt like they were in more control. Now, this was never true. It was never actually true. You couldn't really control the world with thought. But certainly at the time when we were younger, and let's say we were being exposed to these really adverse conditions, it was all we had. We were stuck in a present moment that was unsafe, maybe had violence, and there was no safety available. So the only place we could go to find safety was into our minds. We would retract into our minds and we would imagine the world being a certain way. We would think about the world and try and get control over the world in order to manage ourselves. That's completely natural. It's a really natural safety mechanism that happens. And if you've suffered trauma early in life, that mechanism also did relatively keep you safe. It provided safety when you were unable to cope and manage with the truth and the energetics of what was going on. Now, when we're moving through the awakening process, we're pulling that safety mechanism apart, really. Maybe gently, maybe all at once. But ultimately that self, that ability to fall into self-referential thought and try and control the world, that gets seen through. And once that's seen through, the emotion body comes online. So what I mean by the emotion body is the energetics of emotions that have been stored in the body through our lifetime of conditioning. Now, when those energetics and those emotions are in a response to trauma, deep, like serious, injurious trauma, then actually once that safety mechanism of self's kind of disappeared, all of these trapped emotions, previously trapped emotions, begin to surface, begin to arise, begin to bubble up. And that can be really, really challenging. Now, I know that's often the case. The emotional aspect is the case for most people when they awaken or they see through self-view. And this is why there's so many videos about shadow work, inquiring and investigating into the shadow aspects of our emotional self so we can reveal them and unbind from them. But it's a little bit different when the body and the nervous system has been traumatized. See, it's not just a case of having a little trapped emotion stuck somewhere that we can inquire into and then slowly begins to release and bubble and dissipate out. What it becomes is that the very trauma that was impacted upon us at a very early age begins to get triggered again. And we can feel like we are back in mortal danger where there's nothing going on. In fact, often the sense of calm and peace and stability that comes along after awakening, that can act as a trigger, believe it or not. So once there's peace and quiet and we're not so wrapped up in thought and things start stabilizing, the nervous system responds and sees that as a threat. And we fall into dysregulation and start experiencing, traumatic symptoms or post-traumatic stress symptoms. And these can be really challenging. They can be very worrying as well. And it's very difficult. So the reason the reason I'm talking about this is because it's been a part of my life. Pretty much everything I've just said has been a part of my life, going through an awakening process. And then discovering that, actually, what sits underneath, it's not just emotional shadow. It's a dysregulated nervous system from very, very early on in my life that won't just be inquired into or released or, dissipated with the intention to feel fully. And I learned the hard way because I was kind of dropping into the shadow work side of things. It's like, right, well, I'll go into the emotion that wants to bubble up. I can feel it. Let's just allow it to be there. But it would overwhelm. It would completely overwhelm my system. But I would say, well, no, but I need to allow it to be here. And the more I would allow it, the more it would overwhelm me. And it just started re-triggering traumatic events and traumatic responses in the body. And it's really unhelpful. From a healing point of view and from, an unbinding from traumatic conditioning point of view, is really unhelpful because it just re-establishes that trauma response. You'll feel the body just start flexing again, the nervous system closing around the trauma, trying to trap it. And it's even more difficult post-awakening because there's nowhere left to hide. I can't anymore drop into that world of thought that I mentioned previously to try and manage the world and, through concepts and ideas. That's just not available anymore. I know that was just a faculty of the mind. So then I'm up front and up close with the energetics of re-triggered early childhood trauma. And often I was left with nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, and it was particularly painful. So if any of this rings true to you, if you're feeling any of these kind of traumatic emotional responses following an awakening, or let's say you've had some awakening experiences, you've opened to some of what it means to be awake, if you want to call it that, and you're feeling this like emotional traumatic response, there are really key skills that you can use in the moment to try and down-regulate your nervous system, to just give yourself a bit of a break when you feel the nervous system kind of ramping up to that state of crisis again. One of them, which is super easy, and it's one that I used quite a lot, is applying gentle touch to your wrist. So it might seem a little basic, but actually, like giving yourself in those moments some gentle touch on your wrist, which is pretty sensitive, and just having a warm intention to say, or you could even use the words, I'm here, I'm listening. And say that to yourself. And just keep stroking your wrist. And I know it sounds simplistic, it might sound a bit basic, but that's the kind of reassuring touch and message that we often, well, if you've been traumatized, you probably wouldn't have received as a child. So that in itself can help to down-regulate the nervous system. Another thing is going outside. It's well known and well documented that being around the natural patterns of the world, like the fractals of trees and plants and sky, it has a healing impact on the brain. They've been able to track brain waves of people in natural environments as opposed to in synthetic, more straight line environments. And they can see that it helps people to just down-regulate and really calm down. So going for a walk and being outside amongst trees, animals, open sky, fresh air, with no real plan, no agenda, just walking and feeling your feet on the ground, that can really help to down-regulate the nervous system. There was a really great study which showed, and this is from medical healing as well, so people that had been involved in an operation, a medical operation, that had a window in their room looking out to trees in the natural world outside, were shown to have increased speed of healing from their physical wounds than in those that were in a room with no windows. Which, I mean, you could say that's coincidental, but it was a pretty decent study. And we can see how brainwaves change when we're around the natural world. So if you have a chance to get outside and be around nature when you're feeling particularly traumatized and heightened and in crisis, yeah, do that. Also be around others. It might not feel like the thing that you want to do, especially when you're feeling so raw and the body's hurting so much and you feel your nervous system flexing and everything about you says hide, hide, hide. Actually being around trusted people in that state of vulnerability and tenderness can be a huge tonic. It can be really, really important. And especially if you get a chance to share what's going on. Now, you might not be able to share it fully, but if you can just share something about what's happening in your experience with someone that you trust and care about, just saying, listen, I'm having a bit of an adverse reaction, an adverse response. My nervous system's on fire at the moment. I feel really quite maybe fearful. I just want to spend some time in your company. If you just share that with somebody, that can be, well, it can really help us to feel at ease. So yeah, there's a lot of different methods that we can use in the moment when we're feeling deep trauma response following an awakening, even, well, not even just following an awakening, just in life in general, but often it's more deeply felt after an awakening experience because, like I said, that safety mechanism of mind is kind of dissolved quite a lot. So we're in that experience of feeling like on fire and deep existential fear, and you feel all the trauma of childhood coming back up. You can use very simple, very tender processes and practices to help down-regulate the nervous system. Watching TV is not a bad shout either, or reading a book, especially if you've been on a path of awakening, you've probably done quite a lot of inquiry and, opening the mind and opening the senses to what's going on right now. However, when you're in the middle of overwhelm, inquiring and digging deeper and asking questions and analysing and trying to get to the root of it all can be really detrimental. So simple distraction can go a really long way. So watching something pretty peaceful, let's say on TV, on Netflix, I don't know, I like watching The American Office. It was kind of funny and easy to watch. I would maybe stay away from really tense, gory horror movies. That could trigger you quite a lot. But something that just feels like it's easy to wash over you. You can maybe have a little chuckle and you don't have to invest an awful lot. And it kind of distracts you from that urge to get to the bottom of what's going on, which is triggering the trauma response. Or reading a book, reading a simple book that, is going to feel quite nice. I'm not too great on books. Most of the books I've read are pretty intense, so I'm probably not going to recommend any books. But reading a book that is going to have like a gentle feeling, it would just be a nice distraction. Listening to music, but something that's going to change the direction you're on when you're in the middle of responding to trauma or feeling trauma deep in your being, and you just feel that kind of nagging inquiry and analysis just triggering it again and again. Change gear, change environment, find something else to do. Now, none of these are really a long-lasting solution or healing process for dealing with trauma. You need help. You need professional help, really. Doing it alone is extremely difficult. And I know I mentioned speaking to friends and family members about what's going on with you. I think the most impactful thing you can do is seek out somebody who's got a history of working with trauma sufferers using maybe a somatic modality. So somatic just means body-based, because they recognize how the body and the nervous system is affected by trauma. And take some time to work with them over a period of time. Who knows, maybe months, it might be years. But give yourself the opportunity to build a relationship with a professional, to understand what's going on and to gently unbind from these traumatic responses and these traumatic triggers. Don't think that you can do it alone. And don't just use these soothing mechanisms to just get by, because who wants a life of just getting by? Especially if you've been on a path of self-exploration, you want that to continue, to really deeply learn about what it is to be alive. And these kind of somatic, trauma-sensitive therapies built over time are exactly the right tool for the job to help you dig a bit deeper, accept yourself more fully, learn what it is to love yourself, and to hopefully eventually heal. So I thought I would offer some of these things because they're in my life, they've been in my life. And I know they're in the lives of a lot of people that I've been speaking to recently, actually. People have been reaching out to me and sharing their experiences of this. So I wanted to share a bit back and hopefully let those people know that they're not alone. There's a lot of us in the world that have had these experiences, and there is help out there. Now, if this kind of thing interests you, like looking at awakening, healing from trauma, I recently did a really lovely podcast edition with Zubin, like Z-Dog MD, you may have heard of him, where we talk in depth for 2 hours and 15 minutes about awakening, trauma, and healing. It was a really heartwarming conversation between us, and it's a much more deep dive than this. So it gives you the chance to listen and to dig a little bit deeper. And I'm hoping it feels like we're probably going to work together again, exploring this further. But you can find that on his website. If you type ZDogMD into Google, go to his website, hit podcasts, and you'll find the podcast itself. It's called Awakening the Heart. Thank you so much for listening. And if you are one of those people in the world that has had experiences of trauma and is still continuing to be triggered by these traumatic responses in the nervous system, I feel for you and my heart goes out to you. Feel free to leave me a message if you've got any questions.